Sarah Mitchell stood at the edge of the crowded community center, watching as volunteers signed up for various roles in the upcoming marathon. The annual Riverside City Marathon was the biggest sporting event in their small town, drawing professional runners from across the country. Tables were set up throughout the room, each representing different volunteer opportunities: water stations, registration, crowd control, and finish line support. The buzz of conversation filled the air as people chatted excitedly about their chosen roles. Most volunteers were content to help in traditional ways, handing out water bottles or cheering from the sidelines. But Sarah's eyes were fixed on one particular table that seemed to be generating quite a bit of attention, though not the kind she expected. At the pacemaker table, a small group of men huddled together, their conversation peppered with technical terms about split times, endurance training, and race strategy. Pacemakers were elite runners who helped guide participants to achieve their target finishing times. It was considered one of the most challenging volunteer roles, requiring exceptional fitness, precise timing, and the ability to maintain consistent speeds for hours. Sarah had been running seriously for 3 years now. What started as a hobby to stay fit had evolved into something much more significant. She found herself waking up at 5 in the morning, eager to hit the trails before work. Her weekend-long runs had gradually increased from a few miles to distances that impressed even seasoned runners. But despite her growing confidence and improving times, she had never considered herself in the same league as the serious athletes who dominated local races. The conversation at the pacemaker table grew more animated as the men discussed the difficulty of finding qualified volunteers. The marathon organization needed pacemakers for various finishing times, from 3 hours for competitive runners to 5.5 hours for recreational participants. The most challenging assignment was the 4-hour pace group, which required maintaining exactly 9 minutes and 9 seconds per mile for the entire 26.2-mile distance. "We're still short on pacemakers," said Marcus Rodriguez, the volunteer coordinator who had been organizing the marathon for over a decade. "Especially for the 4-hour group. That's one of our most popular pace targets. But it requires someone with serious endurance and the mental toughness to stay consistent when things get tough." The men around the table nodded knowingly. They understood the unique challenges of pacing. Unlike regular runners who could speed up or slow down based on how they felt, pacemakers had to maintain their assigned speed regardless of weather conditions, terrain, or their own physical state. They carried the responsibility of helping dozens of runners achieve their personal goals. Tom Fletcher, a local running club president with graying temples and the lean build of a lifelong athlete, shook his head. "The 4-hour pace is brutal. You need someone who can run a marathon significantly faster than that to have enough in reserve to stay steady. Most people who can run under 4 hours want to race for their own time, not pace others." Sarah listened to their discussion while pretending to examine information about other volunteer opportunities. She had been considering signing up to help at a water station, thinking it would be a good way to support the running community that had become such an important part of her life. But hearing about their staffing challenges sparked something unexpected within her. The truth was, Sarah had been secretly harboring a dream that felt almost too ambitious to voice. In her private training runs, she had been experimenting with different paces, timing herself carefully, and discovering capabilities she never knew she possessed. Her longest run to date had been 22 miles, completed at a pace that surprised even herself. But the gap between training alone and stepping into a leadership role in a major race felt enormous. As the conversation continued, Sarah learned more about what pacing involved. Pacemakers wore distinctive shirts and carried signs indicating their target finish time. Runners would cluster around them throughout the race, using them as guides to achieve their personal goals. Some participants trained for months with a specific finishing time in mind, making the pacemaker's role crucial to their success. The responsibilities seemed overwhelming, but also oddly appealing. Sarah had always been the type of person who thrived when others depended on her. In her job as a project manager at a local engineering firm, she was known for her reliability and ability to keep teams focused on their objectives. Could those same skills translate to running? Marcus continued explaining the challenges they faced. "We've had some pacemakers drop out at the last minute in previous years. When that happens, it can ruin the race experience for dozens of participants. People plan their entire race strategy around following a specific pace group." Sarah took a deep breath and approached the table. The conversation gradually died down as the men noticed her presence. She could feel their curiosity, mixed with what seemed like polite skepticism. "I'd like to volunteer as a pacemaker," she said, her voice steadier than she felt inside. The silence that followed was brief, but noticeable. Marcus recovered first, his expression shifting to one of professional interest. That's great. What's your marathon experience? I haven't run a marathon yet, Sarah admitted. But I've been training seriously for 3 years. My longest run was 22 miles, and I've been consistently hitting target paces in my training. Tom Fletcher exchanged a glance with another volunteer before speaking. Pacing is different from running for yourself. You're responsible for other people's goals. What time are you thinking about? Sarah had already done the math in her head. Based on her training runs and the pace she could comfortably maintain, she believed she could handle the 4-hour group they were struggling to fill. 4 hours, she said. The reaction was immediate. A couple of the men couldn't suppress small smiles, though they tried to be diplomatic. That's ambitious, Marcus said carefully. The 4-hour pace requires someone who can comfortably run significantly faster than that. Do you have any race times we could look at? Sarah felt her cheeks warming but maintained her composure. I ran the half marathon here last year in 1:52. I've been improving steadily since then. The men did quick mental calculations. A 1:52 half marathon suggested she could potentially run a 4-hour marathon, but just barely. For pacing, that would leave no margin for error. Tom Fletcher spoke up again, his tone gentle but direct. Here's the thing about pacing. You need to be able to run your target time on your worst day, not your best day. Weather, terrain, stomach issues, whatever comes up. If you're right at your limit, you can't help others when they need it most. Sarah understood their concerns, but she also felt a surge of determination. I know it sounds presumptuous, but I believe I can do this. My training has been very consistent. I track everything: pace, heart rate, nutrition, recovery. I know exactly what I'm capable of maintaining. Another volunteer, James Park, who had been quiet during the conversation, leaned forward. What's your typical weekly mileage? I average about 45 miles per week, with 1 long run, 2 medium runs, and 2 easy recovery runs, plus cross-training twice a week. The men looked surprised. 45 miles per week was serious training, more than many recreational marathoners managed. Marcus made notes on his clipboard. Tell me about your longest training runs. What pace were you hitting? Sarah had prepared for this question. My 20-mile runs have been averaging 8:45 per mile. The 22-miler was 8:50 average, but that included some hills, and I felt strong at the finish. This information shifted the dynamic slightly. An 8:45 pace for 20 miles suggested she might indeed have the fitness to pace a 9:09 marathon. But the skepticism remained visible on several faces. Look, Tom said, clearly trying to be encouraging while managing expectations, we appreciate your enthusiasm. But pacing is about more than just fitness. You're dealing with crowds, weather, navigation, and the responsibility of keeping dozens of people on track. Most pacemakers have years of marathon experience. Sarah had anticipated this objection. I understand the responsibility. But everyone has to start somewhere, right? And you said yourself that you're having trouble finding volunteers for this pace group. What if I could prove I'm ready for this? Marcus looked intrigued. What do you mean? Give me a test. Let me pace a group during one of the training runs your marathon program offers. If I can't handle it, I'll volunteer for something else. If I can, then consider letting me pace the 4-hour group. The suggestion caught the group off guard. The marathon organization did indeed offer several group training runs leading up to the race, designed to help participants practice race conditions and meet other runners. Using one of these as a pacing trial was actually not a bad idea. James Park nodded slowly. That's not unreasonable. We have a 20-mile training run scheduled in 3 weeks. We could use pacemakers for that event too. Tom Fletcher still looked doubtful. Even if she can handle the physical aspect, there's the leadership component. Pacing isn't just about running at a steady speed. You're dealing with people's emotions, their fears, their physical problems during the race. Some runners get chatty when they're nervous. Others go silent when they're struggling. You have to read the group and adjust your approach. Sarah considered this seriously. It was true that she had limited experience managing groups of runners during actual events. Most of her running had been solo or with 1 or 2 training partners. But her professional background had taught her a lot about reading people under stress and adapting her communication style to different personalities. I work with project teams under pressure all the time, she said. I know it's not exactly the same, but I'm used to keeping people focused on goals when they're stressed or frustrated. And I'm a good communicator. I can be encouraging when people need motivation or quiet when they need to concentrate. Marcus was warming to the idea of the trial run. The 20-mile training run would be perfect for testing this out. We need pacemakers for that anyway. And It would give us a chance to see how you handle the real challenges of the role. The conversation continued for another 15 minutes, covering practical details about pacing strategies, equipment, and the specific requirements of the 4-hour pace group. Sarah listened carefully, asking thoughtful questions and taking mental notes about everything she would need to prepare. As the volunteer session began to wind down, Marcus handed her a packet of information about the training run. Study this material carefully. The 20-mile run is 3 weeks from Saturday. If you can successfully pace that event, we'll seriously consider your application for the marathon. Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she walked to her car. She had committed herself to something that felt both thrilling and terrifying. The skeptical looks from the experienced volunteers echoed in her mind, but so did Marcus's willingness to give her a chance. Over the next few days, Sarah threw herself into research about pacing strategies. She read articles by experienced pacemakers, studied race reports from marathons around the world, and analyzed data from her own training runs with new intensity. She discovered that successful pacing was indeed about much more than maintaining a steady speed. Effective pacemakers needed to account for course elevation changes, weather conditions, and the psychological ups and downs that runners experience during long distances. They had to be prepared for everything from bathroom breaks to minor injuries, all while keeping their group on track to achieve their time goal. Sarah also learned about the unique challenges of the 4-hour pace group specifically. Runners targeting this time typically included a mix of experienced marathoners looking to improve their personal records and ambitious first-timers who had trained seriously for months. Both groups brought high expectations and significant emotional investment in their goal. The more Sarah learned, the more she understood why the volunteers had been skeptical. Pacing required a combination of physical fitness, leadership skills, race knowledge, and mental toughness that typically developed over years of running experience. She was proposing to step into this role with far less experience than most pacemakers possessed. But Sarah also recognized something about herself that perhaps the others hadn't seen yet. Her greatest strength as a runner wasn't raw speed or natural talent. It was her ability to plan carefully, execute consistently, and maintain focus under pressure. These were exactly the qualities that successful pacemakers needed most. The 3 weeks leading up to the training run became an intensive preparation period. Sarah modified her training schedule to include specific practice sessions focused on pacing skills. She recruited friends to join her for runs where she practiced maintaining exact paces while managing conversations and monitoring how others in the group were feeling. She also spent time studying the course map for both the training run and the actual marathon. Every hill, turn, and potential bottleneck was analyzed and incorporated into her pacing strategy. She researched weather patterns for the time of year and developed contingency plans for different scenarios. As the training run approached, word had spread through the local running community about Sarah's unconventional volunteer application. Opinions were divided between those who admired her confidence and others who questioned whether she was ready for such a significant responsibility. The night before the training run, Sarah laid out her gear carefully. She had purchased a proper pacemaker's watch that could display current pace, average pace, and split time simultaneously. Her nutrition plan was tested and refined through multiple long runs. She had prepared motivational phrases and pacing cues to help guide her group through difficult moments. Despite her thorough preparation, Sarah felt the weight of expectations as she tried to fall asleep. Tomorrow would determine whether her dream of becoming a pacemaker was realistic or simply an ambitious overreach. The skeptical faces of the volunteers remained fresh in her memory, along with their valid concerns about her readiness for this role. But beneath the nervousness was a quiet confidence built on months of disciplined training and careful preparation. Sarah had always been someone who rose to meet challenges, and she sensed that this opportunity could be a turning point in her running journey. Whether she succeeded or failed, she would learn something valuable about her own capabilities and the sport she had grown to love. The morning of the 20-mile training run arrived with unseasonably warm weather and high humidity. Sarah stood at the starting area in the pre-dawn darkness, watching as dozens of runners gathered for what would be her first test as a pacemaker. She wore the distinctive orange vest that identified her role, with a large sign attached to her back displaying, "For a clock marathon pace, 9:09/mile." The atmosphere was different from any group run Sarah had experienced before. These weren't casual runners meeting for a social jog. They were serious marathoners in the final stages of their training, treating this run as a dress rehearsal for race day. Many had traveled from neighboring towns specifically to test their race strategies under organized conditions. Marcus Rodriguez approached her with a clipboard and a reassuring smile. "How are you feeling this morning?" "Ready," Sarah replied, though her stomach was churning with nervous energy. "I've studied the course and have my pacing strategy planned out." "Good. Remember, your job isn't to be perfect, it's to be helpful. These runners signed up to follow you because they trust you to guide them to their goal. Some of them have been training for months specifically to hit a 4-hour marathon." The weight of that responsibility settled on Sarah's shoulders as she looked around at her assigned group. About 15 runners had gathered near her pacing sign, ranging in age from their 20s to their 50s. She could see the mix of determination and anxiety that Marcus had warned her about. Among her group was Janet Morrison, a 42-year-old mother of 3 who had returned to serious running after years focused on raising her family. Janet had completed 2 previous marathons, both in times just over 4:30, and was hoping to finally break the 4-hour barrier that had become her personal obsession. There was also David Chun, a 28-year-old software engineer running his first marathon. David had been following a strict training plan for 6 months and had become fixated on achieving a 4-hour finish time as proof that he could commit to and accomplish a major athletic goal. The pressure he had placed on himself was visible in his nervous fidgeting and constant checking of his watch. Another member of the group was Rita Sandoval, a 55-year-old high school teacher who had already completed 8 marathons. Rita was experienced enough to know that pacing was crucial for her goal, and she scrutinized Sarah with the practiced eye of someone who had followed both excellent and terrible pacemakers in previous races. As Sarah introduced herself to the group, she could sense their mixed reactions. Some seemed pleased to have a pacemaker for their target time, while others appeared surprised by her youthful appearance and lack of obvious marathon experience. The same skepticism she had faced from the volunteers was present here, though more subtly expressed. "I know some of you might be wondering about my background," Sarah addressed the group directly. "I haven't paced a marathon before, but I've been training consistently for this role, and I'm committed to helping all of you achieve your 4-hour goal. My job is to maintain exactly 9:09 per mile average pace, account for course conditions, and help manage the mental challenges of running 20 miles. Rita Sandoval spoke up with the confidence of experience. "Have you run a 4-hour marathon yourself?" "Not yet," Sarah admitted. "But my training indicates I can maintain this pace comfortably with energy to spare for pacing duties." This honest response seemed to gain her some credibility with the group. Experienced runners appreciated straightforward communication over false confidence. As the starting time approached, other pace groups gathered nearby. Sarah observed the veteran pacemakers leading the 3:30, 3:45, and 4:30 groups. They moved with easy confidence, chatting casually with their runners while making final adjustments to their watches and hydration systems. Their experience was evident in small details, how they positioned themselves relative to their group, their relaxed body language despite the early hour, and the way they answered questions with authority built on years of racing. Tom Fletcher, who was pacing the 3:45 group, caught Sarah's eye and nodded encouragingly. Despite his initial skepticism, he had respected her willingness to take the trial seriously and had offered some helpful advice during their brief conversation the previous week. "First mile is always chaos," he had warned her. "People start too fast, there's jostling for position, and everyone's adrenaline is running high. Your job is to stay calm and run your pace regardless of what anyone else is doing. Some of your group will go out too fast. Let them. They'll come back to you after a few miles, and you'll have taught them something valuable about race strategy." The starting signal came at 6:30 a.m. sharp. Sarah clicked her watch and settled into what felt like an easy warm-up pace, trusting her preparation and the technology on her wrist to guide her through the first critical miles. Almost immediately, she noticed that about half of her group had surged ahead, caught up in the excitement of the start and the faster pace of runners from other groups. "Let them go," she called to the runners who remained with her. "We'll see them again in a few miles." Janet Morrison had stayed with the pace group, along with Rita Sandoval and for other runners who understood the importance of conservative early miles. Sarah was pleased to see that the most experienced members of her group had trusted her strategy rather than following the crowd. The first 3 miles passed smoothly as the large group of runners spread out across the rolling hills outside of town. Sarah's pace felt comfortable, perhaps even a bit easy, which was exactly what she had hoped for. She needed to have energy reserves available for managing group dynamics and making pace adjustments for course conditions. By mile 4, The runners who had started too fast began to drift back toward her group. David Chun was among them, looking slightly embarrassed but grateful to settle into the steadier rhythm. Sarah welcomed them back without comment, understanding that learning proper pacing was part of what made these training runs valuable. "How are we doing on pace?" Rita asked as they approached the first major hill on the course. Sarah glanced at her watch, pleased with the data she saw. "We're 5 seconds fast overall, which is perfect for this uphill section. I'm going to slow us down slightly to maintain even effort rather than even pace on this climb." This type of pace management was something Sarah had studied extensively in her preparation. Rather than stubbornly maintaining 909 per mile regardless of terrain, effective pacemakers adjusted for hills and headwinds while keeping the overall time goal on track. It was a more sophisticated approach that separated experienced pacemakers from those who simply followed their watches. The hill strategy worked well. Sarah's group crested the climb feeling strong while other runners who had maintained aggressive paces on the uphill were beginning to show signs of strain. As they descended the other side, Sarah gradually brought their pace back to target, her watch showing they were now just 2 seconds fast through 8 miles. "Nice work on the hill," Sarah called to her group. "This is exactly how you'll want to handle the elevation changes during the marathon. Even effort, not even pace, when the course demands it." Janet Morrison was looking strong and seemed to be enjoying the group dynamic. "This is the best I've felt at 8 miles in any of my long runs," she said. "Usually I'm already starting to worry about whether I can hold the pace." This comment highlighted one of the psychological benefits of group pacing that Sarah was beginning to understand firsthand. When runners focused on following someone else's pace rather than constantly monitoring their own performance, they often discovered they were capable of more than they realized. The middle miles of the run brought new challenges as the morning temperature climbed higher than expected. The weather forecast had predicted mild conditions, but by mile 12 the sun was beating down intensely and humidity was making everyone work harder to maintain their target pace. Sarah noticed the signs of heat stress beginning to affect her group. Conversations became shorter, some runners were breathing more heavily than earlier in the run, and the natural spacing of the group was starting to stretch out as individual fitness levels became more apparent under the challenging conditions. "Let's take walking breaks through the water stations," Sarah announced at mile 13. 30 seconds to get water down and cool off. We can afford the time and still hit our target." This decision sparked some debate within the group. David Chun was particularly resistant to the idea of walking breaks, feeling that they represented a sign of weakness or failure to maintain proper fitness. Rita Sandoval, however, immediately supported Sarah's strategy. "She's right," Rita told David. "In heat like this, taking care of hydration and cooling is more important than maintaining perfect running form. You'll run stronger in the later miles if you're properly hydrated now." Sarah appreciated Rita's support, but she also understood David's concerns. The decision to include walking breaks was one that required confidence in her overall pacing strategy and the ability to communicate why it served the group's ultimate goal. "Here's the thing," Sarah explained as they approached the water station. "Our goal isn't to run every step at exactly 9:09. Our goal is to finish 20 miles in the time that represents marathon pace for a 4-hour finish. These conditions are tougher than marathon race day will be, so we adapt our tactics while keeping our strategy intact." The walking breaks proved to be exactly what the group needed. The 30-second pauses allowed everyone to drink properly, pour water over their heads, and reset their focus for the remaining miles. When they resumed running, Sarah noticed that the group was naturally staying together better, and the conversations were resuming. Mile 15 brought them to the most challenging part of the course, a series of rolling hills that would test both physical conditioning and mental toughness. Sarah had studied this section carefully and had planned her approach to maintain group cohesion through the difficulty. "This is where our marathon will be won or lost," she announced as they approached the hills. "Not these specific hills, but our ability to stay mentally tough when the race gets hard. We're going to treat this like mile 20 in a marathon. Everyone stays together, we support each other, and we prove to ourselves that we can handle adversity." The hill section revealed the true fitness levels within the group. 2 runners began to struggle and gradually fell behind despite Sarah's encouragement. She had to make a difficult decision about whether to slow the entire group or maintain pace for those who were still strong. After a quick assessment, Sarah chose to maintain the target pace. The struggling runners were still within sight and could rejoin the group if they recovered, but slowing everyone down would compromise the training experience for the majority of participants who were handling the challenge well. This is exactly what happens in a real marathon. She called back to the runners who were falling behind. Don't get discouraged. Use this as information about your current fitness level and adjust your marathon goal accordingly. It was a difficult moment for Sarah as a pacemaker. She wanted to help everyone succeed, but she was learning that effective pacing sometimes meant making choices that felt harsh but served the greater good of the group. By mile 17, the group had stabilized around 8 runners who were handling the pace well despite the challenging conditions. Sarah was pleased to see that Janet Morrison and David Chun were both still strong, along with Rita Sandoval and several others who had found their rhythm in the middle miles. The final 3 miles would be crucial for evaluating Sarah's performance as a pacemaker. These were the miles where physical fatigue combined with mental pressure to create the conditions that most closely resembled late marathon challenges. Sarah had saved some of her mental energy for this section, knowing that her leadership would be most important when her runners were at their most vulnerable. She began offering more frequent encouragement and monitoring the group more closely for signs of distress. "Everyone check in with me," she called as they passed mile 18. "How are you feeling? Any problems I should know about?" The responses were generally positive, though she could hear the fatigue in their voices. More importantly, she could see in their body language that they were digging deeper to maintain pace than they had been earlier in the run. "This is perfect," Sarah told them. "This is exactly how mile 18 should feel in a marathon. You're tired, but you're still in control. You're proving to yourselves that you can handle 4-hour marathon pace even when conditions are tough." Mile 19 brought an unexpected test when David Chun began to show signs of severe fatigue. His running form deteriorated noticeably, and Sarah could see that he was struggling to maintain the pace that had felt comfortable just a few miles earlier. "David, how are you doing?" Sarah asked directly. "I'm struggling," he admitted. "I don't think I can hold this pace for another mile, let alone 7 more miles in a marathon." This was exactly the type of situation that separated good pacemakers from great ones. Sarah had to quickly assess David's condition, provide appropriate guidance, and manage the impact on the rest of the group. "Listen to me," Sarah said firmly but encouragingly. "You've run 18 miles at marathon pace in conditions that are harder than race day will be. That's already a massive accomplishment. Right now you're learning what every marathoner needs to learn: how to run when running gets hard." She continued pacing the group while keeping David engaged. "You have 2 choices. You can slow down and treat this as a learning experience about your current fitness level, or you can dig deeper than you've ever dug before and find out what you're really capable of. Both choices are valid, but only you can decide which one serves your goals better." David's response to this challenge would become one of the defining moments of Sarah's first pacing experience. Rather than dropping back, he found a new level of mental toughness and stayed with the group through mile 20, finishing the training run exactly on pace despite the physical and mental adversity he had faced. As the group completed their 20 miles, Sarah felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with exhaustion. She had successfully guided 8 runners through a challenging workout under difficult conditions, helping them prepare for marathon success while learning valuable lessons about their own capabilities. The immediate feedback from her group was overwhelmingly positive. Janet Morrison was effusive in her praise, crediting Sarah with helping her achieve the strongest long run of her entire training cycle. Rita Sandoval, whose approval carried particular weight given her experience, pronounced herself impressed with Sarah's pacing strategy and group management skills. "You handled those hills and the heat stress better than some experienced pacemakers I've followed," Rita told Sarah as they cooled down after the run. "You made smart decisions under pressure and kept everyone focused on the real goal." Even David Chun, despite his struggles in the final miles, expressed gratitude for Sarah's encouragement and guidance. "You helped me discover something about myself today," he said. "I didn't know I could push through that kind of mental barrier." Marcus Rodriguez had been monitoring the various pace groups throughout the run, and he approached Sarah with obvious satisfaction as she finished her cool-down routine. "Congratulations," he said simply. "That was as good a pacing performance as I've seen from someone in their first attempt. You kept your group together through difficult conditions, made smart tactical decisions, and helped your runners learn valuable lessons about their capabilities." Sarah felt a surge of pride and relief. The trial run had been more challenging than she had anticipated, but she had risen to meet those challenges successfully. More importantly, she had gained confidence in her ability to handle the responsibilities of marathon pacing. "So does this mean I can pace the 4-hour group in the marathon?" she asked. Marcus smiled. "I think we'd be lucky to have you." The 6 weeks between the successful training run and Marathon day passed in a blur of final preparations, nervous energy, and growing anticipation. Word of Sarah's impressive pacing debut had spread through the local running community, generating both support and skepticism that seemed to intensify as race day approached. Sarah's approval to pace the 4-hour marathon group had become somewhat controversial among local runners. While her performance during the training run had convinced the race organizers of her abilities, some veteran marathoners questioned whether she deserved such a prominent role without having completed a marathon herself. The debate played out in online running forums and during group training runs, with Sarah often finding herself the subject of conversations she wasn't part of. "I heard she's never even run a marathon," Sarah overheard one runner saying at the local running store. "How can someone pace a time they've never achieved themselves?" These comments stung, but they also motivated Sarah to prepare even more thoroughly for the challenge ahead. She understood that she would be under intense scrutiny on race day, with both supporters and skeptics watching to see if she could deliver on the promise she had shown during the training run. Her preparation routine became almost obsessively detailed. Sarah studied weather patterns for marathon day, researching how different conditions might affect her pacing strategy. She memorized every significant feature of the marathon course, every hill, turn, water station, and potential bottleneck. She practiced her race day nutrition plan during multiple long runs, testing different combinations of energy gels, sports drinks, and solid food to find what worked best for maintaining steady energy levels. The marathon course itself presented unique challenges that hadn't been present during the training run. The race would start in downtown Riverside City, winding through residential neighborhoods before heading into the countryside for a challenging middle section. Miles 15 through 20 included several significant hills and a particularly difficult stretch along an exposed ridge where wind could become a major factor. Sarah spent considerable time studying the elevation profile and developing specific strategies for each section. She knew that effective pacing required more than just maintaining a steady pace. It demanded the ability to adjust for course conditions while keeping her group on track for their overall time goal. The most challenging aspect of her preparation was mental. Sarah had always been confident in her individual running abilities, but the responsibility of guiding dozens of runners toward their personal goals created a different type of pressure. She would be wearing the pacemaker vest that made her visible to thousands of spectators, many of whom would be judging her performance throughout the race. To prepare for the mental challenges, Sarah began working with Dr. Amanda Foster, a sports psychologist who specialized in endurance events. Dr. Foster helped Sarah develop strategies for managing the psychological pressure of pacing while maintaining focus on her primary responsibilities. "The key to successful pacing is understanding that it's not about you," Dr. Foster explained during one of their sessions. "Your ego, your personal running goals, your desire to prove yourself, all of that has to take a back seat to serving your group. The paradox is that by focusing completely on others, you often perform better than if you were focused on yourself." This advice proved particularly relevant as Sarah dealt with the ongoing skepticism from some community members. Rather than viewing their doubts as personal attacks, she began to see them as additional motivation to perform well for the runners who would depend on her guidance. 3 weeks before the marathon, Sarah received an unexpected boost to her confidence when Janet Morrison contacted her with exciting news. Janet had continued training consistently after the successful 20-mile run, and her subsequent workouts had shown remarkable improvement in both speed and endurance. "I wanted to thank you for that training run," Janet told Sarah over coffee. "Something clicked that day about what I was capable of. My last 2 long runs have been the strongest of my entire training cycle. For the first time, I actually believe I can run a 4-hour marathon." This feedback meant more to Sarah than any validation from race organizers or experienced runners. Janet represented exactly the type of runner she hoped to help, someone with the fitness and determination to achieve their goal who just needed proper guidance and support to unlock their potential. As word spread about the positive impact of Sarah's pacing approach, her group for Marathon Day began to grow beyond the typical size. The race organization normally tried to keep pace groups to about 15 runners, but registration for the 4-hour group was approaching 30 participants. Marcus Rodriguez discussed this development with Sarah during their final pre-race meeting. "We've got 28 runners signed up to follow you on race day. That's larger than we usually prefer, but the demand has been strong. Are you comfortable managing a group that size?" Sarah had anticipated this possibility and had developed strategies for handling a larger group. "I've thought about this. The key will be positioning and communication. I'll need to run where the middle of the pack can see and hear me clearly, and I'll need to be more proactive about managing the natural spreading that happens with larger groups. The size of her group added another layer of complexity to an already challenging assignment. Large pace groups tended to become unwieldy during crowded sections of the course, and managing 30 runners through water stations and narrow stretches would require excellent crowd management skills. 2 weeks before the marathon, Sarah participated in her final long training run, a 22-mile effort designed to simulate race day conditions as closely as possible. She ran the exact pace she would maintain during the marathon, practiced her nutrition strategy, and tested all of her race day equipment. The run went perfectly, leaving Sarah feeling confident in her physical preparation. More importantly, it provided final validation that she could maintain 4-hour marathon pace with energy to spare for the additional demands of pacing. Her average heart rate during the run was comfortably in her aerobic zone, indicating that the pace would be sustainable even under the stress of race day conditions. The week before the marathon brought the typical pre-race taper period, with reduced training volume designed to allow her body to recover from months of preparation while maintaining fitness. Sarah had never tapered for such an important event before, and she found the reduction in training volume created nervous energy that was difficult to manage. To channel this energy productively, Sarah spent time reaching out to members of her pace group, learning about their individual goals and concerns. This outreach served the practical purpose of helping her understand what to expect from her group, but it also helped her feel more connected to the people she would be guiding. Among her group was Michael Torres, a 35-year-old paramedic attempting his third marathon. Michael's previous attempts had resulted in times of 4:15 and 4:08, and he was desperate to finally break the 4-hour barrier that had become an obsession for him. "I've trained harder for this marathon than for anything in my life," Michael told Sarah during their phone conversation. "I've run more miles, followed a stricter diet, and sacrificed more social time than I ever thought I would for a running goal. If I don't break 4 hours this time, I think I might be done with marathons." The intensity of Michael's commitment and the pressure he had placed on himself were both inspiring and concerning to Sarah. She understood his desire to achieve the goal, but she also recognized the danger of attaching too much emotional weight to a specific outcome in an event as unpredictable as a marathon. Another member of her group was Lisa Chong, a 29-year-old teacher running her first marathon. Lisa had followed a conservative training plan and was primarily focused on finishing rather than achieving a specific time, but her training had gone well enough that her coach had suggested she might be capable of a 4-hour finish. "I'm honestly not sure if I belong in the 4-hour group," Lisa confided to Sarah. "Part of me thinks I should aim for 4:30 to be safe. But my coach says I'll always wonder what if I don't try for the faster time." These conversations helped Sarah understand the psychological complexity of her role as a pacemaker. She wouldn't just be maintaining a steady pace. She would be managing the hopes, fears, and dreams of nearly 30 runners who had invested months of preparation in achieving their goal. The Marathon Expo, held the 2 days before the race, provided Sarah's first opportunity to meet most of her pace group in person. The Expo was a massive event featuring hundreds of vendors, speaker presentations, and race packet pickup for the thousands of participants. Sarah had arranged to meet her group at a designated time and location to discuss race strategy and answer any final questions. The turnout exceeded her expectations, with 25 of her 28 registered runners attending the meeting. The diversity of her group was striking. Ages ranged from Lisa Chong, the 29-year-old first-timer, to Robert Kim, a 58-year-old insurance agent running his 15th marathon. Fitness levels varied significantly, from runners who regularly trained at paces faster than 4-hour marathon pace to others who would be pushing their limits to maintain the target speed. "I want to be very clear about what to expect on race day," Sarah addressed the group. "My job is to get you through 26.2 miles in exactly 4 hours. That means maintaining an average pace of 9 minutes and 9 seconds per mile, adjusted for course conditions and race tactics." She continued with specific guidance about positioning within the group, nutrition strategies, and how to handle various scenarios that might arise during the race. The questions from her group revealed both their preparation level and their anxiety about the challenge ahead. "What happens if someone in our group needs to stop for a bathroom break?" asked David Shun, who had stayed with Sarah's group after his positive experience during the training run. "That's your choice to make," Sarah replied. "I'll be maintaining pace regardless. If you need to stop, try to get back to the group if possible, but don't panic if you can't." You'll have prepared well enough to finish strong even if you're on your own for part of the race. Robert Kim, the experienced marathoner, asked about Sarah's strategy for the hill sections. I've run this course before, and miles 16 through 19 can be brutal if you're not prepared for them. Sarah had prepared extensively for this question. We'll adjust our effort level rather than our pace on the hills. That means slowing down slightly on the uphills to maintain sustainable effort, then allowing gravity to help us recover the time on the downhills. The goal is to reach mile 20 still feeling strong rather than having blown up our energy reserves on the climbs. The final days before the marathon were filled with typical pre-race activities, carb-loading dinners, equipment checks, weather monitoring, and attempts to manage pre-race nerves. Sarah found herself sleeping poorly despite her best efforts at relaxation, her mind constantly reviewing race strategies and contingency plans. The weather forecast for race day was calling for cool temperatures and light winds, nearly ideal marathon conditions. This was a relief to Sarah, who had been concerned about a repeat of the hot, humid conditions that had made the training run so challenging. On the evening before the race, Sarah received a phone call from Tom Fletcher, the experienced pacemaker who had initially been skeptical of her abilities. Tom had become something of a mentor to Sarah in the weeks following the successful training run, offering advice and encouragement as she prepared for marathon day. I wanted to call and remind you of something important, Tom said. Tomorrow, when things get tough, and they will get tough, remember that you've already proven you can do this job. That training run in difficult conditions showed everyone what you're capable of. Trust your preparation, trust your instincts, and focus on serving your group. Everything else will take care of itself. The phone call provided exactly the reassurance Sarah needed as she went through her final race preparations. She laid out her race day outfit, double-checked her equipment, and reviewed her pacing charts one final time before attempting to get some sleep. As she lay in bed the night before the marathon, Sarah reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this point. 6 months earlier, she had been a recreational runner with no racing ambitions beyond personal fitness. Now she was preparing to pace nearly 30 runners in one of the region's most prestigious marathons, carrying the responsibility for helping them achieve their most important running goals. The transformation had required more than just physical training. Sarah had developed leadership skills, learned to manage pressure, and gained confidence in her ability to perform under scrutiny. Regardless of what happened during the marathon itself, she had already grown in ways that would benefit every aspect of her life. But tomorrow would be the ultimate test of everything she had learned and prepared for. In 12 hours, she would stand at the starting line of her first marathon, wearing the pacemaker vest that made her responsible for the dreams and goals of nearly 30 runners who trusted her guidance. The skeptics would be watching to see if she could deliver on the promise she had shown during training. Her supporters would be hoping to see their faith in her abilities validated. Most importantly, the runners in her pace group would be depending on her leadership to help them achieve goals they had worked toward for months. Sarah had done everything possible to prepare for this challenge. Her fitness was excellent, her race strategy was sound, and her equipment was tested and ready. The only remaining question was whether she could execute under the pressure and scrutiny of marathon day, transforming months of preparation into 4 hours of successful pacing performance. Marathon morning arrived with crisp air and clear skies, the kind of perfect running weather that Sarah had hoped for throughout her months of preparation. She woke at 4:30 a.m., her body naturally rising despite the early hour, as if it understood the significance of the day ahead. The pre-dawn routine had been rehearsed dozens of times during her training. Sarah ate her carefully planned breakfast, oatmeal with banana and honey, plus coffee, exactly 3 hours before the race start. She double-checked her race outfit, ensuring her pacemaker vest was properly positioned and her timing sign was securely attached. Her watch was programmed with all the split times she would need to maintain perfect pace throughout the 26.2-mile course. Arriving at the marathon staging area 90 minutes before the start, Sarah was struck by the energy and scale of the event. Nearly 3,000 runners were preparing for the race, creating a buzz of nervous excitement that filled the downtown streets. Volunteers were setting up the final elements of the course, while spectators began claiming their viewing positions along the route. Sarah made her way to the designated meeting area for pace groups, where other pacemakers were gathering with their distinctive colored vests and time markers. She immediately spotted Tom Fletcher, who was preparing to lead the 3:45 group for the 4th consecutive year, and Marcus Rodriguez, who was coordinating the entire pacing operation. Big day, Sarah, Marcus greeted her with a warm smile. "How are you feeling?" "Ready," Sarah replied, and she genuinely meant it. The months of preparation and the successful training run had built her confidence to a level where nervous excitement had replaced paralyzing anxiety. "My group should be gathering here in about 30 minutes. The other pacemakers welcomed Sarah into their pre-race routine, sharing last-minute tips and observations about course conditions. Despite their experience advantage, they treated her as an equal, acknowledging that she had earned her position through demonstrated competence rather than just enthusiasm. "First marathon pacing is always interesting," said Elena Vasquez, who was leading the 4:30 group and had been a pacemaker for over 5 years. "You'll be surprised how much energy you get from helping other people achieve their goals. It's actually easier than running for your own time in many ways." As 6:30 a.m. approached, members of Sarah's pace group began arriving at the meeting point. She recognized most of them from the expo meeting, but seeing them in their race day gear brought home the reality of what they were attempting together. Janet Morrison approached Sarah with obvious excitement mixed with nerves. "I barely slept last night," she admitted. "I keep thinking about finally breaking 4 hours after all these years of trying." Michael Torres, the paramedic who had placed enormous pressure on himself to achieve the 4-hour goal, looked focused but tense. He had arrived early and was going through an elaborate warm-up routine while constantly checking his watch and adjusting his race belt. Lisa Chong, the first-time marathoner, seemed surprisingly calm compared to some of the experienced runners in the group. "I figured if I was going to be nervous, I might as well be nervous about a challenging goal rather than an easy one," she told Sarah with a smile. David Chun, who had struggled during the late miles of the training run, looked determined but realistic about the challenge ahead. "I've done more mental preparation since that training run," he said. "I know what to expect when things get hard, and I have a better plan for handling it." As the group assembled, Sarah counted 27 runners who had gathered to follow her pace. One member was missing due to a last-minute injury, but the size of the group was still larger than typical for a pace team. "All right, everyone listen up," Sarah addressed her group as the 7 a.m. start time approached. "Today is about teamwork. We're going to cover 26.2 miles together, supporting each other through the tough parts and celebrating together when we cross the finish line in exactly 4 hours." She reviewed key tactical points, positioning within the group, nutrition timing, and how they would handle the challenging middle sections of the course. Most importantly, she reminded them about the mental approach that had proven successful during the training run. "When this gets hard, and it will get hard around mile 18, remember that feeling hard is different from being impossible. You've all trained for this distance at this pace. Trust your preparation and trust each other." The walk to the starting area was filled with the nervous chatter typical of any marathon morning. Sarah's group joined the stream of runners making their way to their assigned starting positions, passing through crowds of spectators who had come out early to support their friends and family members. At the starting line, Sarah positioned herself at the front center of her group, where her pacemaker vest and timing sign would be visible to all her runners. The energy at the start was electric, with thousands of runners packed together waiting for the signal that would begin their individual journeys toward their marathon goals. "Remember, the first mile is always chaos," Sarah called back to her group. "Stay calm, run your own pace, and don't worry if we get separated early. We'll come together naturally after the initial rush settles down." The starting horn sounded at exactly 7 a.m., and Sarah clicked her watch as she began moving forward with the mass of runners. The first quarter mile was indeed chaotic, with runners jostling for position and the pace fluctuating wildly as the field spread out. Sarah focused on maintaining steady effort rather than exact pace during the early confusion, trusting that her average would work out correctly once the field stabilized. Her watch showed they were running slightly faster than target pace, but she knew this was typical for marathon starts and would correct naturally. By the end of the first mile, her group had largely reassembled around her. The initial surge of faster runners had moved ahead while slower starters were falling back, leaving Sarah's pace group in the position they needed to maintain throughout the race. "Mile 1, 9 minutes flat," Sarah announced to her group. "We're 9 seconds fast, which is perfect. We'll naturally settle into target pace as the crowds thin out." The early miles passed smoothly as they wound through the residential neighborhoods of Riverside City. Spectators lined the streets, offering encouragement and holding signs for their friends and family members. The energy from the crowds was infectious, helping to offset the early morning hour and the long journey that lay ahead. Sarah found herself settling into the rhythm of pacing more easily than she had expected. Her fitness level made the early pace feel comfortable, leaving her mental energy available for monitoring her group and managing the tactical aspects of the race. "How is everyone feeling?" she called back to her runners as they approached mile 5. The responses were unanimously positive. The group was moving well together, conversations were flowing naturally, and everyone seemed to be handling the pace comfortably. Most importantly, they were running exactly on target pace with no wasted energy from surging or struggling to catch up. Miles 6 through 10 took them through downtown Riverside City and into the transition area where the course headed toward the countryside. This section included several turns and some crowded areas where navigation became important. Sarah had studied this section carefully and knew exactly where potential bottlenecks might occur. She guided her group through the crowds efficiently, using her pacemaker status to maintain their position without having to fight through slower runners. "Great job staying together through that crowded section," she told her group as they reached the 10-mile marker. "We're 2 seconds fast overall, which means we're exactly where we want to be." The transition to the countryside brought a noticeable change in both scenery and group dynamics. With more space to spread out and fewer distractions from spectators, the runners settled into a more focused mindset for the challenging middle section of the race. Rita Sandoval, the experienced marathoner who had become one of Sarah's biggest supporters after the training run, moved up to run alongside her. "You're doing a great job managing the group," Rita told her. "Everyone looks comfortable, and the pace feels sustainable." This feedback was valuable to Sarah, who was still learning to read the subtle signs that indicated how well her group was handling the challenge. Rita's experience gave her observations particular credibility. The halfway point came at 2 hours and 30 seconds, putting them 30 seconds ahead of perfect 4-hour pace. Sarah was pleased with this position, far enough ahead to handle any unexpected delays in the second half, but not so far ahead that they were wasting energy. "Halfway done," Sarah announced to her group. "We're in perfect position for a 4-hour finish. The next 6 miles will test our fitness, but after that, it's all about mental toughness and supporting each other to the finish line." Miles 13 through 18 included rolling hills and a particularly challenging section along an exposed ridge where wind could become a factor. Sarah had developed specific strategies for this part of the course, and she was eager to see how her tactical planning would work under race conditions. The first significant hill came at mile 15, and Sarah immediately implemented the strategy she had practiced during training. Rather than maintaining exact pace up the climb, she focused on maintaining steady effort, allowing the pace to slow slightly while keeping everyone running comfortably. "Easy effort up the hill," she called to her group. "We'll make up the time on the downhill. Stay relaxed and keep your breathing controlled." The strategy worked perfectly. The group crested the hill feeling strong while other pace groups around them were showing signs of strain from trying to maintain their target pace regardless of terrain. Mile 16 brought them to the exposed ridge section where Sarah had been concerned about wind conditions. Fortunately, the morning was calm, but the rolling terrain and lack of spectator support created a more challenging psychological environment. It was in this section that Sarah first noticed signs of struggle within her group. Michael Torres was beginning to breathe more heavily, and his running form was becoming slightly labored. David Chun was falling back from his earlier position near the front of the group. "Check in with me, everyone," Sarah called. "How are we doing?" Most of the responses remained positive, but Sarah could hear the first notes of fatigue in several voices. This was exactly what she had expected based on her study of marathon physiology and pacing dynamics. "This is where the Real Marathon begins," she told her group. "Everything up to now has been preparation. The next 8 miles will determine whether you achieve your goal. Stay focused, stay together, and remember why you trained so hard for this." Mile 18 marked the beginning of what marathoners often call the wall, the point where glycogen depletion and accumulated fatigue combine to make every step significantly more difficult. Sarah had prepared extensively for managing her group through this crucial phase of the race. The first sign of serious distress came when Michael Torres began to slow noticeably. His breathing had become labored, and Sarah could see that he was struggling to maintain the pace that had felt comfortable just a few miles earlier. "Michael, talk to me," Sarah said, moving closer to him within the group. "What's going on?" "I'm hitting a wall," Michael admitted, his voice strained. "I don't know if I can hold this pace for another 8 miles. This was exactly the type of crisis that Sarah had mentally rehearsed dozens of times. Her response would be crucial not just for Michael's experience, but for maintaining the morale and focus of the entire group. Listen to me carefully, Sarah said firmly but encouragingly. You've run 18 miles at 4-hour marathon pace. That means your body is absolutely capable of doing this. What you're feeling right now is normal. It's what every marathoner experiences. The question is whether you're going to let temporary discomfort stop you from achieving a goal you've worked toward for months. She continued pacing while keeping Michael engaged. I want you to focus on staying with the group for just one more mile. Don't think about 8 miles or even 5 miles. Just stay with us through mile 19. Can you do that? Michael nodded, drawing strength from Sarah's confidence and the support of the runners around him. The strategy of breaking down the remaining distance into manageable segments was one that Sarah had learned from sports psychology research. Mile 19 brought additional challenges as more members of the group began to feel the effects of accumulated fatigue. Lisa Chong, despite her relative inexperience, was actually holding up better than several veteran marathoners. But David Chun was struggling significantly. I don't think I can make it, David confessed as they approached mile 20. This is harder than anything I experienced in training. Sarah had to make rapid decisions about how much time and energy to invest in struggling runners versus maintaining pace for the group members who were still strong. It was one of the most difficult aspects of pacing, balancing individual needs against the collective goal. David, you have a choice to make right now, Sarah said directly. You can decide that this is too hard and slow down, which is completely understandable. Or you can decide that the next 6 miles are going to hurt, but that achieving your goal is worth temporary pain. Both choices are valid, but only you can make that decision. Rather than dropping back, David found a reserve of determination that surprised everyone in the group. I'm staying, he said through gritted teeth. The final 6 miles of the marathon would test everything Sarah had learned about pacing and everything her group had developed in terms of mental toughness and mutual support. They were still on pace for a 4-hour finish, but the margin for error was shrinking with each mile. Mile 20 marked the point where Sarah's pacing experience transformed from a test of physical fitness into a demonstration of leadership under extreme pressure. Her group had covered 20 miles in exactly 3 hours and 3 minutes, putting them perfectly on pace for their 4-hour goal. But the final 6.2 miles would prove to be the most challenging segment of the entire race. The psychological shift that occurred at mile 20 was immediately visible throughout her group. Runners who had been chatting comfortably just a few miles earlier were now focused inward, concentrating on maintaining form and pace as their bodies dealt with the accumulated fatigue of running for over 3 hours. Sarah understood that her role was evolving from pace maintenance to crisis management and motivation. The physical act of running 9:09 pace was still within her capabilities, but keeping 27 increasingly fatigued runners together and focused required a different set of skills entirely. 20 miles down, 10K to go, Sarah announced to her group, deliberately using the shorter distance measurement to make the remaining challenge seem more manageable. You've just proven to yourselves that you can run 20 miles at 4-hour marathon pace. A 10K is something you could run easily on any Saturday morning. The only difference is you're doing it after 20 miles of preparation. This reframing technique was something Sarah had learned from sports psychology research, and she could see its immediate impact on several group members who visibly straightened their posture and renewed their focus. Janet Morrison, who had been one of the strongest runners in the group throughout the race, was beginning to show signs of the fatigue that affects even well-trained marathoners in the final miles. Her breathing had deepened, and Sarah noticed that her typically smooth running stride was becoming slightly labored. Janet, how are you feeling? Sarah asked as they passed the 20-mile marker. Tired, but determined, Janet replied, her voice showing strain but also resolve. I can't believe I'm actually on pace to break 4 hours. I've dreamed about this for so long. The emotion in Janet's voice highlighted the weight of responsibility that Sarah carried as a pacemaker. For many of her runners, this wasn't just about achieving a time goal. It represented months or even years of dedicated training aimed at proving something significant to themselves about their capabilities. Mile 21 brought the first serious casualty of the day when one of the newer members of the group, a runner who had joined them at the expo but hadn't participated in the training run, began to fall back significantly. His form had deteriorated badly, and it was clear that he was experiencing the classic marathon bonk, the sudden onset of severe fatigue when the body's glycogen stores become depleted. Sarah made the difficult decision to let him go rather than slow the entire group. You've run an incredible race, she called back to the struggling runner. Be proud of what you've accomplished today. Walk when you need to, and finish strong. It was a painful moment for Sarah, who wanted to help everyone succeed, but she understood that effective pacing sometimes required making choices that served the greater good of the group. 26 other runners were still on pace for their goal, and her primary responsibility was to them. The loss of one group member seemed to galvanize the remaining runners. Rather than becoming discouraged, they drew closer together and began offering more active support to teammates who were struggling. Michael Torres, who had battled through his own crisis at mile 18, moved up to encourage David Chun, who was still fighting to stay with the group despite obvious fatigue. "We're going to do this together," Michael told David. "Neither one of us is falling back." This peer-to-peer support was exactly what Sarah had hoped to see develop within her group. The most successful pace groups became communities where individual runners supported each other through difficult moments rather than focusing solely on their own struggles. Mile 22 brought them into the final challenging terrain of the course before the flat finish through downtown Riverside City. There was one more significant hill to navigate, and Sarah knew that how they handled this climb would largely determine whether the group maintained cohesion for the final miles. "Last real hill of the day," Sarah announced as they approached the climb. "Same strategy as before, maintain effort, not pace. We'll pick up the time on the downhill, and then it's flat running all the way to the finish line." The hill strategy continued to work effectively. While other runners around them struggled up the climb, Sarah's group maintained steady effort and crested the hill still feeling relatively strong. More importantly, they had stayed together as a unit rather than stringing out as groups often did on challenging terrain. The downhill section after the climb provided a welcome opportunity to recover slightly and pick up a few seconds on their target pace. Sarah was careful not to let the group get carried away by the faster downhill pace, knowing that they needed to conserve energy for the final miles when mental fatigue would be at its peak. "Perfect execution on that hill," Sarah told her group as they reached level terrain again. "We're still exactly on pace, and now it's all flat running to the finish. 4 miles of running that you could do in your sleep if you weren't already tired." Mile 23 marked the point where the marathon transformed from a physical challenge into a primarily mental battle. Sarah's group was still perfectly on pace, but she could see that several runners were reaching deep into their reserves to maintain the speed that had felt comfortable earlier in the race. Lisa Chong, the first-time marathoner, was actually one of the strongest-looking runners in the group at this point. Her conservative training approach and realistic expectations seemed to have left her with more physical and mental reserves than some of the veteran marathoners who had pushed harder in the early stages. "Lisa, you look great," Sarah observed. "How are you feeling?" "Tired, but good tired," Lisa replied. "I keep thinking about how I'll feel crossing the finish line under 4 hours. It seems almost too good to be true, but we're actually going to do this." Rita Sandoval, whose experience and early support had been crucial to Sarah's development as a pacemaker, was also holding strong despite the accumulated mileage. "You've done an incredible job today," Rita told Sarah as they ran together. "This is as smooth a paced marathon as I've ever experienced." Mile 24 brought them within sight of the crowds and energy of downtown Riverside City. The increase in spectator support provided a noticeable boost to the group's energy levels, with several runners who had been struggling beginning to show renewed strength. "Listen to that crowd," Sarah called to her group. "They're cheering for you because they know what you're accomplishing. 2 miles to go, and you're going to finish this marathon under 4 hours." The psychological impact of being within 2 miles of their goal was visible throughout the group. Runners began to straighten up, their conversations resumed for the first time in several miles, and the collective energy of the pace group noticeably increased. David Chun, who had battled through multiple crisis points during the race, was experiencing what marathoners call a second wind, as his body found new sources of energy in the face of approaching success. "I can't believe I'm going to do this," he said, his voice filled with amazement. 3 hours ago, I wasn't sure I could make it to mile 20. Mile 25 marked the beginning of what would be Sarah's finest moment as a pacemaker. With just 1.2 miles remaining, her group was still intact and perfectly on pace, but she understood that the final mile of a marathon often presented the greatest challenges. Some runners experienced a psychological letdown when they realized they were going to achieve their goal, causing them to relax their focus and potentially slow down in the final miles. Others might push too hard in excitement, risking a blow-up that could cost them their time goal despite being so close to success. 1.2 miles to go, Sarah announced to her group. "This is where we show everyone, including yourselves, what we're really made of. We've run 25 miles perfectly." The next 1,200 meters are going to be the most satisfying running of your entire life. The crowds lining the final mile were enormous, creating a tunnel of sound and energy that propelled the group forward. Sarah could see the impact on her runners' faces. The fatigue was still there, but it was now mixed with excitement and pride at what they were accomplishing. Janet Morrison was crying as she ran, overcome by the emotion of finally achieving the goal she had worked toward for years. "Thank you," she said to Sarah through her tears. "Thank you for helping me believe I could do this." With half a mile to go, Sarah's watch showed that they were 15 seconds ahead of perfect 4-hour pace, exactly the margin she had hoped to maintain for a comfortable finish. Her group was not only going to achieve their time goal, but they were going to do it together, as the community she had envisioned at the beginning of the race. "Final turn ahead," Sarah called out as they approached the last corner before the finish line. "When we make this turn, you're going to see the finish line, and you're going to realize that you've done something incredible today." Some runners found final reserves of speed and surged toward the finish line, while others chose to cross together, holding hands and celebrating their shared achievement. Sarah crossed the finish line at exactly 3 hours 59 minutes and 47 seconds, 13 seconds faster than the 4-hour goal she had promised her group. 26 of her original 27 runners finished with her, all achieving the sub-4-hour marathon times they had trained months to accomplish. The immediate aftermath of the race was filled with emotions that Sarah had never experienced before. Her runners surrounded her with gratitude and celebration, many of them tearful as they realized they had achieved goals that had seemed impossible when they began training. Janet Morrison was among the most emotional, having finally broken the 4-hour barrier that had eluded her in multiple previous attempts. "You changed my life today," she told Sarah. "I'll never forget what you helped me accomplish." Michael Torres, who had battled through his crisis at mile 18 to finish strong, was equally grateful. "When I was ready to give up back there, you helped me find something I didn't know I had inside me. That's going to stay with me long after today." Even David Chun, who had struggled throughout the final miles, had managed to finish in 3 hours 59 minutes and 52 seconds, achieving his goal despite the physical and mental challenges he had faced. "You taught me that I was capable of more than I thought possible," he said. Marcus Rodriguez approached Sarah shortly after she had finished congratulating her group members. His face showed the satisfaction of someone whose faith in another person had been completely validated. "That was one of the finest pacing performances I've ever witnessed," Marcus told Sarah. "Not just the time accuracy, but the way you managed the group dynamics and helped people through their difficult moments. You turned skeptics into believers today." Tom Fletcher, who had initially doubted Sarah's readiness for the pacing role, was waiting to congratulate her as she made her way through the finish area. "I owe you an apology," he said simply. "You proved today that pacing isn't about marathon experience. It's about leadership, preparation, and the ability to help others achieve their best. You've got all three." The race statistics that were published later that evening told the story of Sarah's remarkable achievement. Her pace group had the highest finishing percentage of any group in the marathon, with 96% of her registered runners completing the race under 4 hours. The average finishing time for her group was 3 hours 59 minutes and 23 seconds, representing exceptional pace accuracy over the 26.2-mile distance. More significantly, post-race surveys revealed that members of Sarah's pace group rated their marathon experience higher than participants who had followed other pacemakers, citing her communication, encouragement, and tactical management as key factors in their success. The local running community's reaction to Sarah's performance was immediate and overwhelmingly positive. The skepticism that had surrounded her appointment as a pacemaker was replaced by recognition that she had delivered one of the most successful pacing performances in the marathon's history. Within days of the race, Sarah received inquiries from other marathon organizations asking if she would consider pacing their events. Her success had established her as a sought-after pacemaker despite having completed only one marathon herself. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from her pace group members, who organized a celebration dinner 2 weeks after the marathon to thank Sarah for her role in helping them achieve their goals. The dinner became an annual tradition, cementing the bonds that had been formed during those 4 hours of shared challenge and triumph. For Sarah herself, the marathon had been transformative in ways she hadn't anticipated. She had discovered capabilities within herself that extended far beyond running fitness, leadership skills, crisis management abilities, and the deep satisfaction that came from helping others achieve their dreams. The young woman who had nervously approached the pacemaker table 6 months earlier facing skeptical looks from experienced volunteers, had proven that determination, preparation, and genuine care for others could overcome any doubts about conventional qualifications. Sarah had not only shattered the record for successful pacing in her first attempt, but she had also redefined what it meant to be ready for such a responsibility. Her story became an inspiration for other runners who believed they might be capable of more than others expected, proving that sometimes the greatest achievements come from those brave enough to volunteer for challenges others consider impossible.